Hello everyone. Today I'm going to do a review of the film The Creator. Now, I had to approach this one a little differently than the few that I've done so far because it's not at the same category as your run-of-the-mill romantic comedy or just your basic drama with maybe a couple of dynamic characters. It really is seeking for a higher plane of consciousness and expression. It's trying to be deep. It's clear it thinks it's almost literary in the way it's trying to present a world of humans trying to coexist with artificially intelligent constructs, if you will. So, given that it's trying to be a little bit more high-minded, I think the review should be a little more high-minded. Now, I've isolated a number of different points I wanted to touch upon in order to sort of give my review of the film and how well it treats these different categories. Before I do that, I'm going to give my basic review and say that the film ultimately is worth watching, but don't expect it to be in the same category as something like Blade Runner, a film that was done in '82 and is still considered one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, specifically as it deals with artificial intelligent constructs. But it's helped out by the fact that it's based on one of the greatest books ever written on the subject of artificial constructs, namely Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? A book I've actually read, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's one of the best science fiction books ever written. In fact, the only one I can think of right off the top of my head that is a far cry from it in terms of quality, it's the one that all science fiction films are gauged by, in my opinion, is Neuromancer by William Gibson, arguably the best book ever written in the science fiction genre, period. Truly a magnum opus of literature. It's profoundly deep and sentimental and beautiful. Now, that touches upon the film The Creator itself. First things first, I did do some research on it. The Creator as a film is not based on a book. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't aid it in its attempt to express this sort of complex world where humans coexist with artificial constructs, because it doesn't have source material to draw from. To be perfectly honest with you, they are trying to create an entire complex world and do it cinematically without the aid of source material. And that is extremely challenging for a science fiction film. So my quick review, right here, it's worth watching, no question about it. If you're a fan of science fiction, by all means go and watch it. I think you'll enjoy it as much as you'll enjoy any science fiction film. But it's not, and I want to repeat this, not in the same category as something like Blade Runner. Sorry, it's just not. And that's partly because it doesn't have the kind of source material to draw from that Blade Runner did. I mean, just the title is amazing. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's suggesting, are artificial constructs truly alive and real? Do they have the kind of cognition system to make them sentient? And that's the overriding theme of Blade Runner. And in a way, that's the overriding theme of The Creator. So how does it handle this world? Well, first of all, it looks a bit like our world, with very little, in my opinion, to suggest a futuristic society. Yeah, they have this thing called, I forget what it's called, the Monarch, whatever. It's flying around like a spaceship in the sky, sort of like a atmospheric space station. Yeah, that does suggest technology of an advanced nature. You also have tanks and the weaponry and even the artificial constructs themselves. You have a lot of different iterations, from the very basic constructs designed to do simple tasks to artificial constructs that are human-like in their approach and living and processing cognitively. So it does have a tiered system of artificial constructs and technology that suggests, yes, it does have a world-building platform that is believable. In fact, in some ways it's more believable than Blade Runner. Blade Runner oversteps a little bit, but I think it makes it more interesting stylistically to do that. Where science fiction's concerned, you kind of want to do something groundbreaking or new, or you're just rehashing somebody else's concepts or ideas. And unfortunately, that's where the creator stands. It's almost like a carbon copy of other films and their particular systems. The next thing is the science itself. You've got these artificial constructs that seem to operate as human beings in some respect almost. They're very lifelike in their facial structures and all that, although they clearly have a big hole in their head. Go figure. It's almost like they're saying that their cognitive processes are vacuous or hollow by having a hole that you could basically see through. Maybe they should have put like a telescopic lens in the center so, hey, it doubles as a huge telescope while they're at it. I don't know. It's a little bit odd, but you definitely know where the artificial constructs are and what aren't. There's no question they have not made these artificial constructs to resemble human beings like in Blade Runner. Where in Blade Runner they become so complex, so lifelike, that they have to use special equipment to be able to tell the difference between the humans and the artificial constructs. So there's the science aspect to it. Does it achieve this? Absolutely. But not at the level that Blade Runner does, to be honest with you. So now the society. How does the social structure compare with Blade Runner and what you might expect a science fiction society to be? And to be honest with you, where that's concerned, the social structure is almost identical to ours. I see no real change in the way people operate, other than they have artificial constructs to perform certain human functions, but that's it. You could almost just remove the artificial constructs from the movie The Creator and it would almost look like our day, apart from some of the obvious technological advances in the military technology, in this huge monarchical space station floating around in the atmosphere. Right? So yeah, unfortunately the society driven aspects are wanting. In fact, I'll take that one step further and say they're so lacking that they're actually using archetypal structures, social structures. And I'm going to give you an example of this. You could take all of the police officers in an entire film, regardless of which side they're on. You could take one from the other side, put it into the other one, and they're interchangeable. Very, very little variation or deviation in the way that the archetypal characters operate. The military are all very similar, the police are all very similar, even the AI constructs are very similar. The people themselves are similar. Nobody has a character arc except maybe the protagonist. And if I'm being honest, even the protagonist doesn't have much of an arc. It's a very shallow arc. In fact, when I look through the entire film, there's only two characters I can think of that have an actual character arc. Everyone else is just flat. Flat as as I say, a pancake. Just straight, flat, no change, no growth, no progression, period. That makes a very dull movie. You want there to be growth. You want there to be a change in the way that people think or operate or feel, and it's just not there, other than the protagonist. And he's almost a carbon copy of Deckard and Blade Runner, in a way. A man who has been a hardcore operative for trying to bring down artificial constructs, that's both. Blade Runner and The Creator have almost the same exact main character. And they both come to the same end, in a way, in terms of how they are thinking. They both have fallen for an artificial construct in some way. The one has actually fallen in love with one. The other has fallen in love as a sort of paternal figure for an AI child of sorts. A little bit different relationship, because this one's paternal, this one is more, dare I say, sexual. So even the premises of the films are very similar, because they've both been operators against the artificial constructs as they stand. I hate to say it, very similar story. It could literally be a carbon copy of the other film. So how about the artificial constructs themselves? How do they compare between, for instance, Blade Runner? And I touched upon this earlier a little bit. The artificial constructs in Blade Runner are a whole different level of beauty. And we're talking, they have artificial animals that are extremely beautiful and stylized, with snakes who are so beautifully rendered that even their scales look like actual snake scales. The people look like the artificial droids of sorts, whatever you want to call them. They look like real people. There's an owl that's looking and acting like a regular owl, and it's totally artificial. Yet you can hardly even tell the difference. Now this is something that was in the actual book, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, where animals were so rare and virtually extinct in some cases that nobody had a real animal. All they could hope for was to have an artificial construct animal instead if they wanted a pet or something. So the artificial constructs that are designed to look like humans and animals compared to the artificial constructs in the Creator, there is no question Blade Runner beats it hands down in every sense of the word. It's almost beautiful the way that these animals and androids are expressed in Blade Runner versus the Creator, where the person who designed these didn't do much more than just create something that looks a little bit like a human, and that's absolutely distinguishable. So it was more pragmatic or practical than stylistic and artistic and beautiful. Big difference. Now that leads me to the actual production details itself. Both films, Blade Runner and The Creator, are a marvel where production is concerned. I have to hand it to them. But again, here's where Blade Runner outshines. Even made in 1982, it completely outshines the Creator in just the beauty of the scenery. You've got a world that's film noir, that's dark because the smog is so thick, it's basically blocked out the sun. And you've got these space vehicles that are flying around called spinners, and the lights of the city they shine almost like a nightlight in a dark hallway, creating this almost Vegassian dystopian society where people are milling about dressed creatively and colorfully. It's almost carnivalesque in its beauty. And you might say it's almost overboard, but that's what makes it so interesting. Even the androids themselves, you've got one that's kind of a strange sex worker that is odd and quirky and funny and deadly. You've got another one that is just designed to be a brute, a mining worker, but he has this sort of depth because he's in love with one of the sex workers. And there's this real sense that he wants to be human, but it's just not there. He doesn't have the capability. And then you've got the other one, the sort of leader of the bunch, who's an ex-soldier android that's operating a whole level of creepiness. And there's no question this guy could kill you at the blink of an eye and think nothing of it. Yet he knows in his mind he's not really a human if he does this. And so here's where Blade Runner, again, it's like 2 or 3 plateaus above the Creator in its ability to express this artificial construct that look like human beings. Where in the Creator, they're just like normal people, they're farmers or whatever. And I guess in a way the Creator's constructs make more sense because they're performing normal functions that you would want a robot to perform. But when you're doing something science fiction, you kind of want it to be something greater, something more. They're not trying to be anything more than what they were designed to be. And in a way, that's kind of the point of the film and the Creator. These constructs aren't trying to be evil or to kill and do all that. They just want to live within the sphere of what they were created to do and be left alone. Where the constructs in the Blade Runner have been created to be almost human-like, yet they can't quite achieve it because their cognition processes just don't match up to a human being. It's a really interesting contrast between the two, and I hate to say it, the Blade Runner film presents a dystopian society in a far more stylistic, artistic, beautiful way, you can't help but be mesmerized and drawn into its majesty. Where the Creator, you're like, that looks like our society with just some changes. And we have all these archetypal structures where everyone is the same. All cops are the same. All soldiers are the same. All androids are the same. All people that are in the Asian community are just like people in the Asian community versus the people in America just doing the American. You almost feel as in a computer game when they want to simulate 1,000 people and try to create some variation so it doesn't look like the same character over and over again. It almost felt like they did that here. Okay, we need to have a whole bunch of different soldiers with a slight variation so that you can distinguish them as a soldier, but they have nothing more to them. There's no depth to them at all. That depth has just been stripped of them. It's not there, and you don't care if they die. You don't care if they live, because they don't look like they're living anyway. And that's a real problem in the Creator. You want to feel that these people, these artificial constructs, have a right to live and to be sentient and to be treated as such. But they're not really doing that. They're not doing the kind of things that make you sentient in a way. So how can we pine for them to have that when they're not really achieving it? And the other, the Blade Runner, you're not supposed to sympathize with the constructs. You're supposed to say, no, they don't deserve to live because they're psychopathic killers and they aren't human and they're dangerous. And they are. Even the final one, the one that he falls for, you're thinking, I don't know, should she really survive and live under the circumstances? When she could go off the handle at any moment? I don't know, it's a good point to consider. Okay, as far as the pacing goes, Blade Runner is a nice detective story. I mean, he's trying to solve an actual crime and locate people. So there's a sort of suspense, and it's a detective story. It's beautiful in its conception and its function, and the way it perpetuates that particular activity. Almost like taking an old Dashiell Hammett book and then throwing it into a science fiction sphere. It's beautiful. Where the Creator, the pacing is slow. I kid you not, it was all I could do to stay awake. Twice I almost fell asleep, and I had to basically slap myself in the head and say, okay, come on, stay aboard, stay awake, keep focused, because you don't really feel the sort of suspense that you'd really hope for. You never really feel like he's in true danger. I don't know, almost like the gods of writing have already mandated this person's going to survive to the end, period. So it doesn't matter what happens, oh, he'll just do something and survive, no big deal, whatever. You don't really feel like he's going to die at any moment, and that kills the suspense. And since he's the only character with a character arc, you're thinking anyone else, it doesn't matter if they die. They're just placeholders for a robot or a person or an animal. So it's kind of sad, I have to say. Now the script for the Blade Runner, again, was based upon actual source material for one of the greatest science fiction books ever written. It had a lot to pull from. A lot to pull from. The Creator, there is no source material. It's right out of the mind of this writer-director Gareth Edwards. And I think he did a great job considering he has no source material to draw from. I mean, truly, it is a fairly complex story given that there's no book to base it on. Now, I have to hand it to that. And there's one thing that the Creator does, truly, that actually the Blade Runner does as well, that does elevate that story above just standard fare. Blade Runner has this character, who's a hardcore bounty hunter / detective, fall for an artificial construct, because that artificial construct is so real, so true to humanistic cognition function, that he actually falls for her. Plus she's hot, let's face it. Sean Young at the time was amazingly attractive, and what guy wouldn't fall for her, even if she was a psychopathic robot. Absolutely beautiful. In the Creator, you have a similar relationship, only it's more fraternal. It's paternal, where the main character falls in love with this sort of artificial construct child. that this child was so lifelike and real to him and sentient in the way it expresses itself, that he starts to see it as an actual child that deserves to live and deserves to grow. Apparently it's the one child that can actually grow. And this is right out of Blade Runner 2049, no question about it. I mean, they literally took this idea, it would seem, and then just tried to make another movie right out of that. Because it wasn't really fleshed out very well in Blade Runner 2049. Until the very end, you didn't really know what was going on. But in this, you have an actual child that can grow and be like a normal child that was based on an embryo. So all the technology is built on an actual embryonic, organic baby, but with a sort of mechanical brain. So yeah, it's like a real person in that respect. And that's what made it such a big thing. That this person called Nirmata didn't just create another artificial construct, they created a living, growing artificial construct. So there are a lot of things going on here, and that love connection that exists in Blade Runner between Deckard and the girl I believe called Rachel, and this love connection that exists between the protagonist and the creator, I don't even remember his name, that's how forgettable it is, hate to say it, and this child, again, I don't remember its name, Shaggy O or something, Alpha O, I don't know, Alfie, yeah, maybe it's Alfie, because of Alpha O, it's supposed to be like the alpha child or alpha AI construct. There is no question that that love relationship has been established. I have to say, Washington's son did a beautiful job at acting in this film. He carries the entire film on his back, truly, in every sense of the word. There isn't a single character in the film that manages to carry this film, except for the villainous female general major, whatever she is. She does a great job serving as an antagonist. Without her, there would have been no antagonism at all. Because the soldiers, again, are just archetypal whatevers. They are almost irrelevant to the plot other than to advance the military interests. So this love connection between Washington's character and the child succeeds. I have to admit, at the end there, when you're starting to feel, spoiler alert here, there's sort of disconnection between the two, it chokes you up a little bit. The fact that it managed to draw an emotional reaction, a visceral reaction, at that moment tells me they succeeded in that connection. And that is the most important thing they had to do, is to make you be able to feel something for this artificial construct so you actually care if it lives or dies. Period. It makes this, again, spoiler alert, the sacrifice of the protagonist necessary and beautiful. Because if it weren't something you could care about substantially, then the sacrifice would have been an absolute waste. Who cares? I mean, it's almost tragic that a human being would die so that an artificial construct could live, unless you truly believed that this artificial construct that looks and acts like a real child deserves to live, even above the interests of a human society that may be threatened by it. So ultimately, that's my opinion of the Blade Runner versus the creator. A nice contrast to make sure you can see it. Now, there's one thing I wanted to also express that's absolutely essential. In the Blade Runner, there was this sort of edge of sort of hopelessness and sadness and despair, but there's also life. All of these people that were part of the Blade Runner story, that were milling about, living their lives, they felt alive. They felt truly, profoundly human and interesting and creative. Again, the stylism, the artistry, it was there. It was a magical society that made you believe that maybe, you know, the future wouldn't be such a bad place, even if it is sort of dystopian and the pollution has choked out the sun or whatever else. You feel like, yeah, at least there's life. It's brimming around, and they're not all cockroaches. They're all these really interesting, creative individuals that are more than just an archetype. Fortunately, in the creator, they're a bunch of archetypes. You don't really care if the Americans fail in their efforts because they're all archetypes. And in a way, you really don't care if the artificial constructs succeed because they're also archetypes. And this is the flaw with caring about archetypes. You just don't. They're the kind of people in the military that just die and that's the end of it, and they're not living human beings in a way, at least in a film or a cinematic environment. You know, there's always that one person that has to have a character arc that actually dies so you can feel something. Because you don't normally care if the archetypes die. And that is the problem with the creator. It's filled with archetypes. Almost every single character in the film is an archetype. So you have a hard time caring about their wants or needs. You really do. I know I did. If it hadn't been for the actual artificial construct child and the relationship between the protagonist, this film would have been a complete wash for me. I would have said, who cares? And it's sad to say, but that's what it really boils down to. The only thing that saves this film is the fact that the protagonist and this artificial construct child actually establish an intimate connection that's paternal that you care about. And with that said, the film is worth watching. It truly is. By all means, go and watch it. It is a decent science fiction film. It's not Blade Runner or something of that caliber, but it's definitely worth watching. By all means, do it in the theaters. I would recommend the theaters. Just don't expect it to be Blade Runner. Don't expect it to be a groundbreaking science fiction film, because it's not. It's a carbon copy of others, only it's done well. It's a good carbon copy of others, versus a sort of hacked out version that just doesn't play well at all, or you don't buy anything. There's no question in this film, the creator, you suspend your disbelief. You are wrapped up into the world and see it for something that actually does function and it could be possible. There is no question about that, in spite of all the archetypes. So there you go. There's my review of the creator. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've gained some insight from it. Let me know what you think of my review and my opinion on the film. If you absolutely disagree with it, I welcome your, I'd like to hear what you have to say. If you disagree with me thinking the Blade Runner is one of the greatest science fiction films of all time, well, hey, let's arm wrestle. Anyway, thank you for watching. Have a nice day.